Karen thought destroying my lawn was harmless fun until she discovered what happens when you mess with a man who spent 3 decades mastering permanence. For 3 straight months, this entitled tornado of perfume and ego treated my corner lot like her personal shortcut. Every morning, at exactly 7:47, the same white BMW X5 came roaring across my Kentucky bluegrass. Tires hissing, engine snarling, her arrogance leaving grooves through the soft soil I'd poured my savings and soul into. The sound of rubber crushing earth mixed with the metallic whisper of broken irrigation lines, a symphony of destruction echoing through what was supposed to be my retirement sanctuary. My name's Marcus Thompson, 52, a union electrician who spent 30 years wiring the skeletons of cities' shopping malls, hospitals, schools. My specialty wasn't electricity, it was precision. I built things that stayed where they were meant to. Concrete, cable, conduit structures meant to survive time, storms, and fools. After a lifetime of overtime and double shifts, I finally bought my corner slice of heaven in Millbrook Heights. My wife Sarah, battling early-stage Parkinson's, couldn't tend her garden anymore. This lawn wasn't just grass, it was her peace. My promise, every morning I'd sip coffee, listen to sprinklers hiss to life, and think, we made it. Until Karen Whitmore showed up to remind me that peace doesn't last long when arrogance moves in next door. She looked like someone who thought rules were beneath her 40th, hair bleached into defiance, sunglasses that cost more than my first truck. Her husband Derek owned Whitmore Construction, and their mansion looked like Vegas threw up in suburbio columns, fountains, and egos stacked in stone. The first morning I saw tire tracks slicing through my grass, I told myself it was an accident. By day 3, I knew better. The smell of diesel hung in the air like insult, so I set up a motion camera, and there she was crystal clear, barreling across my property with that smug little smirk of entitlement. When I walked over to speak, she didn't even bother looking up from her roses. It's a free country, she said. Maybe don't plant so close to the road if you can't handle a little traffic. My jaw tightened. Ma'am, that's not the road. That's my property. She turned slowly, smile sharp as glass. Are you threatening me? My husband built this neighborhood. I'm on the HOA board, so maybe be careful who you accuse. The way she said careful felt like a loaded weapon. I walked back home, with her voice rattling inside my skull like loose wire. Sarah was watching from the window, worry trembling in her hands. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to fix this. I was going to teach Karen what permanence meant. That night, I sat with my old codebooks flipping through diagrams and measurements I hadn't touched since my last big hospital job. Electricity had taught me patience, precision. When you're trained to build things that can't fail, you stop thinking about quick fixes. You start thinking about consequences. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to break the law. I was going to build something Karen couldn't destroy. That weekend, I went to Tony's Hardware, where the smell of copper wire and fresh lumber felt like home. I loaded up on low-voltage motion sensors, landscape lights, weatherproof wiring, the kind of gear meant to illuminate driveways, not destroy reputations. Saturday morning, I started digging. By sundown, I had installed 8 floodlights along my property line, each one triggered by motion, each connection sealed tight and clean. I called it my courtesy lighting system. Monday, 7:47 a.m. sharp curtains. BMW came screaming around the corner. The moment her wheels touched my property, 8,000 lumens of pure white light exploded in her face. The screech of brakes, the sudden silence afterward, it was better than coffee. I could see her frozen behind the windshield, stunned, before she gunned it through anyway, disappearing into her driveway like a spooked cat. Tuesday morning, same thing, but this time she leaned on her horn, long and angry, waking the whole block. By Wednesday, I'd added a private property sign, just to make sure she knew. Thursday night, my cameras caught movement. There she was, dressed in black, like a discount ninja, kicking over my lights one by one. I watched through my monitor, smiling, because what Karen didn't know was that I'd installed a backup power circuit hospital-grade redundancy, the kind I used for emergency lighting. So while she smashed the first row, the secondary system kicked in, bathing her in bright white light like a stage spotlight on bad behavior. I recorded every second: her designer shoes, her furious face, the exact moment she realized she was on camera. Friday morning, I got an HOA letter in my mailbox. Excessive lighting, disturbing neighborhood tranquility. Signed, by of course Karen Whitmore, HOA treasurer. I laughed out loud. If she wanted a war, she'd just declared it on the wrong man. That afternoon, I stopped by Tony's again. "Marcus, you beautiful genius," he said, wiping his hands on an oily rag. "You're not the first to have trouble with that witch. Half the neighborhood's been complaining for years." Then he introduced me to Mrs. Patterson, a 78-year-old with the eyes of a hawk and a spiral notebook full of notes. "Been documenting her nonsense for 2 years, she said, handing me cookies and a folder full of complaints. Turns out, Karen had been harassing mail carriers, threatening neighbors, even filing bogus HOA violations. That night, I sat at my table, surrounded by evidence and a growing sense of purpose. Karen thought she'd picked a fight with a cranky retiree. What she didn't realize was that I'd spent my life mastering one rule: stability beats chaos every time. And I was about to show her exactly what happens when chaos meets concrete. Karen's war didn't come with shouting, it came with paperwork, gossip, and the slow rot of corruption that hides under polished smiles. Monday morning, a city truck rolled into my driveway, dust puffing under its tires like a storm rolling in. Out stepped Dave Morrison, clipboard in hand, wearing the weary expression of a man who'd forgotten what honesty felt like. "Anonymous complaint," he said flatly. "Unpermitted electrical installations, potential safety hazards." I stared at him, the taste of disbelief sharp on my tongue. The motion lights my perfectly legal, low-voltage system were being treated like criminal evidence. He measured every fixture, every buried wire, jotting notes as if rehearsing a script written by Karen herself. When he handed me the citation, $1,200 fine and 10 days to remove the lights, his cologne couldn't hide the stench of favoritism. Decades on construction sites had taught me to read people as easily as blueprints, and Dave's shaky signature told me one thing: he was scared of someone richer than both of us. "Where do you golf, Dave?" I asked casually. His pen froze mid-stroke. "Millbrook Country Club." The way the flush crept up his neck said everything. That was Derek Whitmore's playground, where back nine deals decided who the city punished and who it protected. When he left, I called Big Jim, my old foreman, who now handled municipal permits. His laugh crackled through the phone. "Dave's been bending rules for developers ever since his divorce. Bill's gotta get paid somehow." The anger that rose in me wasn't hot, it was cold, focused. If Karen wanted to weaponize bureaucracy, she'd just handed me the blueprint to burn her empire down legally. I filed a Freedom of Information request that afternoon, my signature steady as voltage under load. A week later, the clerk slid a stack of photocopies across the counter, the paper smelling of toner and dust. 47 complaints, all signed by Karen Whitmore. 19 neighbors targeted everything from unauthorized paint colors to improper mailbox height. And in 12 of those cases, the same inspector's name appeared at the bottom: D. Morrison. She wasn't a concerned citizen. She was a suburban dictator using city muscle to keep her kingdom polished. But corruption has a habit of tripping over its own wires. One form in the pile stopped me cold: a signed inspection report approving a $1 million addition on Derek Whitmore's mansion. Approved by Dave Morrison. 3 weeks from submission to approval. No revisions, no delays. Anyone who's ever pulled a permit knows that kind of speed doesn't happen without grease. The next morning, I called Tom Rodriguez, a senior electrical inspector I'd worked with for 15 years, the kind of man who still believed in code, both electrical and moral. Within half an hour he was in my yard, hard hat tilted back, examining my setup. "Marcus," he muttered, tracing one of my waterproof connectors with his calloused thumb, "this is museum-grade work. Whoever wrote you up is either incompetent or on somebody's payroll." He took photos, measurements, and enough notes to turn my citation into evidence against Dave. Then his radio crackled: "Major electrical fire at a Whitmore construction site. Faulty wiring. No permits on file." I didn't even have to smile. The universe was already doing it for me. That night, under the dim porch light, I reviewed everything: the complaints, the surveys, the connections. One phrase from the insurance investigator kept echoing in my head: "These property markers look off." If Derek was crooked in his business, what stopped him from bending a boundary line? I called Pete Sanders, my old union buddy turned surveyor. "Bring your fancy toys," I said. "I've got a feeling someone stole my land." 2 days later, Pete's crew arrived with tripods, lasers, and the steady patience of men who measure truth for a living. By dusk, his orange spray paint marked a new reality. My property extended 18 feet further than the stakes suggested. Karen hadn't been cutting across my corner. She'd been trespassing across nearly 20 feet of my legally owned land. Even better, her ornate retaining wall, a 15-grand eyesore, set 4 feet inside my boundary. When she saw the new survey flags, she stormed over like a thundercloud in high heels. "You can't just move property lines because you're having a midlife crisis," she spat. I held up Pete's stamped report. "Actually, I'm just moving them back to where your husband illegally shifted them." Her face flickered through denial, anger, panic. "You stupid blue-collar nobody," she hissed. "My husband built this neighborhood. You think anyone's going to believe you over us?" The scent of her perfume couldn't cover the reek of fear. "Maybe not," I said, "but they'll believe the county records, and they've got his signature on the fake one." That night, I made 2 calls. First to my insurance company's legal division, then to a concrete contractor named Miguel, who'd poured half the city's sidewalks. Because revenge, like concrete, needed the right mix to last forever. By morning, I'd decided on my next move, a perfectly legal decorative landscape feature installed exactly where her tires trespassed each dawn. A concrete bollard, 5 feet deep, rebar reinforced, finished with a granite cap. Purely aesthetic, of course. Miguel raised an eyebrow when I handed him the specs. 42 inches tall, 8 inches thick, 4 bars of half-inch steel. You planning to stop a tank? I just smiled. Something heavy entitlement. We poured the footing Friday. The smell of wet cement curling into the crisp morning like justice taking form. The vibrations from the mixer thrummed through my boots, steady and satisfying. While the concrete cured, I met with Sarah Kim, a real estate attorney whose reputation for precision rivaled my own. She studied the survey, the complaints, the inspection reports, and finally looked up, eyes shining. "Mr. Thompson, you don't need revenge. You have a case that could bankrupt them: property fraud, code manipulation, civil rights violations under color of authority." I nodded, but revenge and justice sometimes were the same hard at. "All in good time," I said. Over the weekend, the neighborhood transformed from wary silence to quiet rebellion. Mrs. Patterson organized what she called the Millbrook Defense Committee. Tony from the hardware store offered his parking lot as headquarters. One by one, neighbors arrived with stories, photos, and evidence. The Hendersons had lost 8 feet of their side yard. The Garcias 15. Every tale painted the same picture: Derek's company had been stealing inches until they added up to fortunes. We weren't just victims anymore, we were witnesses. By Sunday evening, my cameras were repositioned, my documents filed, my concrete monument ready. I stood by the curing bollard, fingertips pressed to the cool surface, feeling the strength set beneath. It wasn't anger that filled me, it was anticipation. Because come Monday morning at 7:47, Karen Whitmore's BMW was going to meet something that didn't yield, didn't bend, and sure as hell didn't forgive. Monday morning dawned calm and golden, the kind of morning that fools you into thinking the world is gentle. The coffee in my hand steamed against the window glass as the familiar growl of a BMW echoed down the street. 7:47 on the dot. Karen's arrogance ran like clockwork. The sun caught her polished hood as she cut the corner, the same line she'd carved 100 times before. But this time, physics had other plans. Her right wheel hit my concrete bollard exactly where calculations predicted. The sound that followed was biblical: metal screaming, glass cracking, rubber detonating against immovable S-tone. The entire neighborhood turned toward the crash like spectators to a miracle. The BMW's front end folded around my decorative garden feature, steam billowing from the mangled hood as Karen stumbled out, her face twisted in disbelief. "What the hell is that?" she shouted, voice shaking. I walked out slowly, mug in hand, savoring the aroma of victory. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. That's a decorative feature. Granite cap, rebar reinforced, municipally compliant." She blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. "You did this on purpose," she shrieked. "You set a trap." I held up the survey and smiled. "It's 8 inches inside my property line. You've been trespassing for months." Her jaw trembled. "You think you're clever? I'll have you arrested." And with that, she whipped out her phone and called the police, as if the world still bent to her will. Officer Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later, his cruiser tires crunching the gravel. He inspected the scene with that blend of calm and exhaustion unique to small-town cops who've seen every flavor of stupidity. Measuring tape in hand, he checked the distance from bollard to boundary. "He appears to be on private property," he said. "Ma'am, do you have permission to drive across this gentleman's land?" The way Karen's lips twitched, you'd think he'd asked her to recite humility. "I don't need permission. I've always driven this way." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Then, I'd suggest you call your insurance. This is a clear case of driver error." The silence that followed was priceless. When the tow truck dragged her BMW away, dripping coolant like shame across my driveway, Karen stood there shaking with rage. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret this." I met her glare with a steady calm forged in 30 years of wiring dangerous circuits. "The thing about permanence," I said quietly, "is it doesn't care about threats." She spun on her heel, heels clicking like gunshots, and disappeared into her crumbling kingdom. For a while, things seemed to quiet down until Mrs. Patterson came knocking 2 days later, eyes wide, phone in hand. "Marcus, dear, you'd better see this." On her screen, Karen paced her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, shouting, "I don't care what it costs. I want that thing gone by Friday. Make it look like an accident." The next clip was worse. "Pretend it's emergency utility work, gas leak, water main, whatever. I'll handle the paperwork." My pulse steadied, slow and deliberate. She wasn't just vengeful, she was stupid enough to turn crime into performance art. Thursday morning, an excavator rumbled down our street, bright yellow, loud as thunder. A man in a hard hat climbed out, glancing around nervously as Karen pointed toward my bollard. "Right there," she ordered. "Make it quick." I called the gas company first. No work scheduled. The water department, nothing. Electric company, negato. She'd staged an entire fake construction job. I started recording as the excavator bucket lowered toward my concrete, metal teeth scraping against my handiwork. The timing couldn't have been better. 2 police cruisers appeared at the end of the street, lights flashing. Officer Martinez, the city's senior code enforcer, stepped out with a clipboard and a look that could curdle paint. "Ma'am," he called out, "you got a permit for this excavation." Karen's tone flipped instantly to honeyed innocence. "Of course. Gas leak repair. Which utility company?" he asked. Her mouth opened then closed. "The city," she stammered. Martinez made a quick radio call. The reply crackled loud enough for everyone to hear. No work orders, no permits, no leaks. And then the operator, pale with panic, pulled out his phone. "She paid me 10 grand cash," he said, voice trembling. "Told me to hit the concrete, make it look like an accident." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was music. Fraud, bribery, impersonating utility authority, her list of charges was longer than her last HOA meeting. As the patrol car pulled away, her face pressed against the window. She screamed something about lawyers, conspiracies, and blue-collar trash. I just watched.com as a grounded wire, while the neighborhood gathered on the sidewalk. For the first time, people smiled at me without fear, like a storm had passed. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, the town hall meeting was standing roomingly. News crews, neighbors, even a few city officials who suddenly remembered ethics. Karen arrived with a legal team that looked like a perfume commercial, polished, overconfident, doomed. Her attorney strutted up, declaring my bollard a public safety hazard. Councilwoman Gonzalez leaned forward. "So you're admitting your client routinely drove across private property?" The murmurs that followed could have powered the city grid. Then, it was my turn. My lawyer, Sarah Kim, projected the evidence. The real surveys, the fraudulent ones, the timestamps, the footage of Karen's BMW, and finally, the video of her bribe. The crowd gasped as her voice echoed through the chamber. "Make it look like an accident." The council voted unanimously. All fines against me dismissed. All Whitmore projects suspended pending federal review. Karen's meltdown was operatic. "You'll all regret this. We built this town," she screamed as security let her out. Then, from the back of the room, a calm voice spoke. "Mrs. Whitmore," said a woman in a dark suit flashing a badge. "I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. You and your husband are under investigation for property fraud, bribery, and municipal corruption." The room erupted. The same woman, who'd once ruled our HOA like a queen, was now being escorted out like a criminal. Months later, the headlines told the rest. Derek and Karen Whitmore convicted in federal court. Property theft across 4 counties. 17 municipal employees implicated. Millions in stolen land. Derek got 3 years. Karen, 18 months. Their mansions sold at auction to cover restitution. But for me, the sweetest victory wasn't their downfall. It was what grew in its place. The neighborhood transformed. We started the Millbrook Justice Fund with the settlement money, helping victims of contractor scams and shady developers. Tony hosted monthly workshops on property rights at his hardware store. Mrs. Patterson ran documentation training for seniors. The Garcias opened the Ballard Cafe, where we gathered each week for empanadas, coffee, and community. The same neighbors Karen had divided were now united under a single truth. We protect each other. Sarah's health improved. Her laughter returned. She planted herbs around the base of the Ballard rosemary, thyme, lavender. The plaque on its granite cap reads, "Millbrook Memorial to Community Justice, established 2024. Some people build monuments for ego. Mine stands for consequence." Every morning when I step outside with my coffee, sunlight catches the stone and throws a golden line across my lawn, the boundary that started it all. The kids play nearby, laughter mingling with the hum of sprinklers, and I think about how small acts of defiance can reshape entire communities. Karen once told me I'd regret standing up to her. She was wrong. Some structures are built to last forever, and sometimes, revenge when grounded in truth, becomes justice poured in concrete.